Star Trek books. They've been around for decades. Join us, the Trek ladies, Kavura and Jen, as we discuss the novels one at a time. Welcome to the Ladies Trek Library. Okay, and we are back with Ladies Trek Library. I'm Kavura, and I'm here with Jen Foley. Hi, Jen.
Hey, Kavura, and hey, listeners. I'm glad to be back.
So this time we are reviewing The Wounded Sky by Diane Duane, and I'll read the back cover. A pretty alien scientist invents the Intergalactic Inversion Drive, an engine system that transcends warp drive, and the Enterprise will be the first to test it. The Klingons attempt to thwart the test, but a greater danger looms when strange symptoms surface among the crew, and time becomes meaningless. Now Captain Kirk and his friends face their greatest challenge: to repair the fabric of the universe before time is lost forever. Okay, so that's the description. So actually, the first thing I want to ask you, Jen, is like how did you pronounce the name of the scientist?
I pronounced it Katilk.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I did too. I thought I heard, I mean, I went and listened to like the first part of a podcast one time, and they called it Cadillac, I think. And I thought, well, that's a neat way to say it, but
It'd be interesting to ask Diane Duane how it was supposed to be pronounced, since it has no vowels in it.
Yeah, we should do that, yeah.
But I will
It'd be neat if we could talk to her.
Right. That would have been great if we could have talked to her. But I will say, just before we get into our questions, when you read the back cover, and when I didn't read it, I don't ever read the little back part or the summary until I've finished reading the book, because I don't want to know anything about it in advance. And when I read it earlier today, the first sentence is a pretty alien scientist. And if I had read that before starting to read the book, I would have imagined one of these stereotypical stories where Captain Kirk has flirts with a
yes,
pretty alien.
Yeah.
And as it turns out, the pretty alien scientist is a giant spider. So it's kind of funny that they described her as a pretty alien scientist.
I know, it is hilarious. And you can see it on the cover of the book too. That's I think that is kind of the way she's described in the book. It's a glass spider. And so, I don't know, I think pretty maybe describes her personality, we could say, because she seemed very pleasant, and her voice, right? They said her voice was like chimes or something, so.
Yeah. Yeah, the cover, it kind of looks like a giant jellyfish to me, but I guess she is described as being like a crystal spider, so I guess that's what they were going for. But
yes. But it is interesting that the book calls her pretty. Yes. So how well do you think that the science was explained in this book about with Katilk's inversion drive?
I don't really think they explained it at all. I mean, it was, Diane Duane refers to it as creative physics, and it's basically I guess her explanation was that Katilk and the people of her race are able to just sort of invent or imagine something existing, and just by imagining it, it exists. So that's really the kind of the explanation that we got, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I thought it was. They did get into some technical stuff in the book, and I thought it was explained pretty well, as far as we're modifying the engines and they're going to do this. But yeah, I think it was good, because it was for the average reader who's not a scientist. They at least made an attempt to say something so that it doesn't just leave you hanging. But it was, also it was the whole thing, the way it turned out, was more metaphysical, right? It because of what happened. I mean, yeah, not just about how they do it, but because of what happened, which we'll get into, this happens every time they do an inversion or a jump. But I like how Katilk was talking to Scotty, and and they both seem to work together and like, oh, we can do this. We're engineers. I like they're talking about it, their camaraderie, and even Spock, when Spock said he had to study it too, but the way he got into it, it was a nice little thing in the book, like that they're doing a science thing. I like that it is science in Star Trek, that this is a book about exploration and about science.
Yeah, I did like that, and I mean it's not that unusual. I mean, I think a lot of the technology, depending on the writer of the Star Trek book, a lot of technology in Star Trek books. Some writers are really trying to get technical and they have an understanding of it and an idea, and other ones I think they're just like making up, you throwing in technological
Yes.
words and technical words to just make it sound like they know, there's something, and it's really just kind of made up. So I'm used to reading Star Trek novels where I'm like, okay, I really have no idea what they're talking about in terms of the technology, but that's okay.
Yeah, I mean, what I usually do is I read the science stuff, but I try not to get too bogged down in it because I think the technology, you could get bogged down if you really wanted to try to understand it, but I think a lot of it is just made up by the writer anyway, so I don't want to I'd rather get into the story than that. But
Yeah, and
yeah.
and as far as that goes as well, I did used to get bogged down. I've had to like try to not get bogged down because sometimes when I was reading it, I would think, do they really are they really trying to describe a phenomena that's in some kind of technical manual that they're trying to stick to in like a writer's universe, or is the person just throwing these words in? And I would try to like understand it and follow it, and thinking, oh, there is some kind of reasoning here, and then I just couldn't follow it. So then now I
Yeah.
just kind of like read through it, and I'm like, okay, I don't really understand that, but that's okay.
Well, and speaking of like other reference books, the so the last page of this book actually has a bibliography, which I thought was interesting. It's got, I mean, I think so. Some of these I hadn't really tried to look them up, but I'm sure some of these books are real books, and others are books in the Star Trek universe. But it's got something by DeWitt, a book called Space Time as a Sheaf of Geodesics in Super Space. So I'm sure it's like if you wanted to look at that book, you could, look up it. I mean, apparently some of the stuff she actually used some of the stuff from these books in this book, The Wounded Sky, and so that's pretty neat that she's got that bibliography.
Yes, and I actually went through and looked up all of the books that were in the bibliography, except
Oh, you
for
did.
the ones that were clearly written in the future. So obviously don't exist. But there's even one on here that was, uh, because she's got these bibliographies, and they have the date that they were published. One of them's 1970, another 1982. There's one that's 1996, primary space as a solvent, the evidence for a non-isotropic entropy gradient. And the book was published in 1983, but I kind of had wondered, oh, maybe like, back on a later edition, they went in and added this article, but then I realized my copy of the book was published in 1983. So she just made that one up. That
Really?
Yeah. So everything from the first two are actual real articles. One was published in Nature and one in a magazine called Relativity, and then the four after that are just totally made up articles that
Yes.
are hypothetically going to be published in the future. But I did think it was cool that she put that in there. That was interesting.
Yes, one by Spock and one by McCoy and one by Katilk with another Vulcan. Um, yeah, that was just a nice little thing to add to the realism of the book.
Yeah, I agree.
And what do you think of the other thing about the inversions, that it caused people to have these visions?
Yeah, so that was interesting. And you know, although it did remind me of this when I was reading it, it wasn't until after I finished reading the book and went and looked in Voyages of the Imagination that uh, actually the Next Generation episode, where no one has gone before, is somewhat based off of this book.
Yes,
Totally
yes.
changed with characters, and it's Next Generation and not the original series, but similar ideas about this creative physics, even though they don't call it that on the episode. And when you're traveling to other galaxies or other universes, having these hallucinations. Um, so I thought it was interesting because even though they were hallucinations, you were led to believe that they were actual events that had happened to other people in the crew. So you weren't really hallucinating something unbelievable or, what we think of when we say hallucination. It was experiencing a moment that someone else, another crew member, had actually experienced in real life, and you were just living as them in their memory, which I thought was kind of cool.
It was an interesting way to write it. So it seems like so the visions actually changed, right? Each time they did an inversion, they felt something different. And the first time, Kirk was actually, it said like he was feeling the Enterprise, like he felt like he was one with the ship. And I thought that was neat. And then of course later on, he felt like he had memories of of Chekhov being in Russia. And then later on, they had a vision of like where everybody on the ship was together, even though it was a hallucination, but they could all see themselves walking around together. So it was interesting the way that everything progressed through the story as it went on, and they jumped so many different times. I say jump or had the inversion, and and the vision changed each time, and it seemed to got a little deeper, got stronger, and Kirk even got injured. So it was neat the way it added to the story, added to the intrigue, and it kept progressing each time.
Yes, and I like too how, although as you mentioned, you do see Kirk experiencing a little bit of Chekhov's experiences, and somebody, I don't remember, was Kirk or someone else, experienced some of Sulu's experiences piloting, but then they also get into where they're experiencing uh, things that happen to some other crew members that are not necessarily named and who aren't necessarily human. And so some of the experiences were weird because, I think there was one, I remember it was about experiencing moments in the life of someone who had tentacles and things like that. So that was kind of interesting.
And what did they say that was really a crewman? I was trying to remember, but
Oh, that part was actually at the end. So yes, that
yeah,
was a
yeah.
crew member because
Oh,
I
oh,
was crew
yes,
member
yeah.
giving. I won't. We're not going to talk about the end yet, but yes, that was a crew member. Some of the other experiences, like there was one where it was clearly someone who, I don't know if they were human or not, but someone who did not live on Earth, lived on an alien world, and was having experiences about the being on the beach and these giant creatures made of stone and stuff like that. And they never said whose memories that was, and it was clearly somebody, either an alien or just a human who didn't live on Earth.
Yeah, that was the strange one, I thought. Yeah, it had, because Kirk and Spock were there, right? That
Yeah.
experienced it. Yes. And and even with these hallucinations, now I don't remember like Catil. Did it ever say what she experienced during these times?
I think she didn't experience anything, right? Wasn't
Yeah,
she the only
that's
one who
okay.
didn't experience anything? And
That's
then
what I was wondering. Yeah.
her, and then there was the other crewman who was, I think he was like described as being like cat-like or a feline, who experienced, and they talked about it in the beginning, how he experienced time in a different way than most other species, and he didn't have those experiences either. So something about how you experience time affected whether or not you had the experiences, because we later learned part of Katilk's creative physics is somehow being able to see into the future to see what the solution is that she created that she hasn't created yet. So
Yes, yeah. It was very interesting. And also, and you know what? I just watched that movie Arrival. Do you know
oh
that?
yeah, yes, I did see it when it first came out.
Yes, and it was based on a book, and I read the book too. I think it was called The Story of Your Life. But yeah, that also had to do with time and about, yeah, beings that don't experience time the same way, and how the future, and the one scientist on Earth that was trying to interpret their language, she could kind of she started being able to see things in the future that hadn't happened yet. It was, yeah. So this book kind of reminded me of that because I just saw that movie.
Oh yeah, I now that I think about it, you're right. I saw it when it first came out in the theater, which was like maybe 6 years ago or something. But and I had seen it more because I was interested in the language because it's about a human scientist trying to
Yes,
figure out how to communicate with aliens who don't speak a language. So and they have a form of communication that's unique.
yes. So that was interesting, and also it also reminded me of the wormhole aliens from Deep Space Nine, just because of the time thing and the having visions, and how the prophet, or the Bajorans called them the prophets, they lived outside of time. And so a little bit of that. And this book was written before, or maybe after the first season of Deep Space Nine. So, but very much around that time period, where I think the author really picked up all of this stuff before Deep Space Nine was on.
Yeah, well, this book was written in, well, it was published in '83.
Oh,
So
83, that's right.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh yeah, I'm way off. Yeah. 10 years before Deep Space Nine.
But what interesting related to that, so we know that that Diane Duane's friend used some of her ideas for the Next Generation episode, um, where no one has gone before, which was in the first
Yes.
season. But also, as I was reading it, I wondered if the writers of Star Trek Five had read this book, because at the end, when we get to this alien, or it's not clear if it's an alien or aliens because it's like a single entity, but it calls itself we. Um, Seemed a lot to me like, and they think of it as a godlike entity because it has all these
Yes.
powers. So that part reminded me of Star Trek Five, which came out about 6 years after this book was published. So I wondered, oh, did they get some of these ideas about, because in this story they're traveling not to the center of the galaxy but outside of the galaxy, and they encounter this um, godlike creature. So
Yeah, yeah, different things, similar things have happened in Star Trek. Yes. So what did you think about Katilk as an alien or as a new character?
well, I had seen Katilk before because she makes an appearance in several other of Diane Duane's novels. I think The Romulan Way and Spock's World. Um, I think she might be in all of the Rihansu books. So I remember her from those, and I liked her as a character then. And I kind of wish I had read this book before reading those, because she's not a major character in those books. And I always thought, oh, this is kind of an interesting character, but it's like I don't really understand her. Now I understand more about her. Um, so I thought she was really interesting. She's kind of like this, I imagine, like this sort of jolly, I imagine her being British. I don't know why.
Okay.
Jolly, like older British lady who's just, charming and, always cracking jokes. And, just someone that everyone likes, like nothing bad to say about them. But then it's kind of like juxtaposed with her species, the Hamalki, which, um, there's a part in here where they talk about them and like how, they when they're breeding, the female kills the male, and then she talks about her experience. Oh, she had this partner for a long time and she misses him, but like she ended up killing him when
Yeah.
they were mating. And she kind of like, when Captain Kirk is kind of flirting with her, which seems weird for me to like imagine Captain Kirk flirting with like a crystalline spider. She kind of makes a joke like, you really wouldn't want to be with me because, then you'd end up dead. But then she describes this, and I'm just kind of like horrified, right? Because she's like this happy, nice character. But oh, she killed her partner, but that's how her species works. So yeah.
It was funny, yeah. And I guess that they wanted to make her well, like a spider in that way, like some spiders, the Black Widow. But I thought she was an interesting character, and I do like how they made her very pleasant and easy to work with. And And her personality almost does seem like she could have been the kind that some of the human men could have fallen in love with if she hadn't been so alien, because that's just the way, that's just the way her personality was. And so I thought that was neat. And the fact that she was a brilliant scientist, and she seemed to want to get to know humans better. She liked being in this environment. She liked working with the Enterprise crew. So she was a great character. It's just neat the way they made her. They didn't make her more, antagonistic. She wasn't arguing with them, at least not in a way where like they was angry all the time. She was this pleasant person all the time.
Yeah. And she became, I like, her best friend on the crew was Scotty. Um,
Yeah, the
so
engineer.
yeah, and they were always having these, very interactions where they were kind of joking around with each other, and he was trying to get her to explain the stuff, and that was interesting. And then I didn't up on this in the book, and it wasn't until I read somewhere, I mean, it was on like Memory Beta. So, her name in the book is K apostrophe T apostrophe LK. And at the end, I thought it was a typo, but like the last pages at the end, there's an S in there a few times. And I was like, oh, it's a typo. But I read online that supposedly she added the S to her name in honor of Scotty. But I don't remember reading that in the book. Do you?
Um, no, but I thought it was her daughter though, right? In the end, of course, we're kind of giving this away, but in the end, she was, well, it was her daughter, and so she had a different name, Kastilk or something like that, Kastilkas, wherever the S was. But I thought that was
Yeah.
her daughter and not really her, so that's why it was a different name,
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I didn't think of her as, I guess it is like her daughter. I thought of her as like
like
I don't know.
reborn. But
Yeah, like being reborn kind of thing. Because that's how she kind of described it. They kind of like die and come back as different incarnations of themselves. But I guess it's like her daughter too.
yeah, so either way, but I mean, but yeah, I did notice. Yeah, I noticed when she came back, she had that the different spelling of the name. And I remember reading too that that was from Scotty, but it wasn't in the book. So
Right.
yeah, that's
Interesting. Yeah, because it's not like the same. Because she did talk about when she was with her partner, who was also a scientist. It makes it sound like their whole race are scientists, all of the Hamaki. That they were hoping that killing your mate, helps make the offspring smarter and healthier and better and all this stuff. Um, so I kind of got the impression that they could reproduce, like have children, but then they could also like regenerate. Because when she came out at the end, it even though it's like her daughter, but she had the same memories, so it wasn't like you have a daughter and it's a different person. It was
oh
kind of like
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was a full-grown person with her memories, but yes, I'm looking at the book and they called it Daughter Self. Katilk's
Oh,
daughter self. Yes.
daughter self. Oh, okay.
So you could take it either way. But since she was used in other books, I mean, yes, Diane Duane does like to reuse some of her characters, which I liked, when I was, reading these books a long time ago, the way that some of the characters continued in other books. That was cool too, that Diane Duane likes to do that.
Yeah. And she uses Harb Tanzer, who is the director of recreation. And I want to say that not just Diane Duane, that there might have been at least one other author who used Harb Tanzer in a book, because I definitely have seen him before in a few other books.
Okay. Yeah, I know he was in some other Diane Duane books because yeah, for some reason he's a memorable character, like because she uses him as almost one of the main characters in a lot of her books, I mean, at least in one major scene in all of her books, like he'll be, the director of, as you said, of recreation. And in this book, I like how he's said to be like a counselor. He's part of Dr. McCoy's staff, and he was kind of used like Deanna Troy, like a counselor. He's someone who supposed to keep up the ship's morale, the people's morale.
And I'm just looking it up now. He is in some other books that Diane Duane did not. Oh no, that's the video game. My bad. It's the Kobayashi Maru, but that's a video game. I was thinking the
Oh,
book. So I think these are all Diane Duane. Rules. No, here's one. Rules of Engagement, but that was written by Diane Duane's husband,
yeah.
Peter Morwood. So yeah, I guess Diane Duane and Peter Morwood have used him in a number of books. And it was kind of interesting. What I liked about him as a character is that they, he manages an area that's sort of like a precursor to the holodeck. So it kind of like gives you a preview of what's to come in Next Generation. It's not exactly like the holodeck, but it's kind of like a, like
Yes.
older version of the holodeck.
Where they could have it was a big empty room, and they could have a projection of a forest there.
Yeah.
And then Sulu with the games, which was kind of like a holographic projection.
Right.
And those were neat things in the book. I like all the new elements, things like that thrown in the book, using the imagination and all of these original things in the book. Those were all good. So what did you think of the aliens introduced towards the end of the book, the others?
Yeah, that was kind of interesting. So it was like an entity that, lived outside of the galaxy, and didn't really know that it existed, and or that others existed until the Star Trek crew came along. And they kind of described it as a god because it's all powerful. But it also, even though it was one entity, it also was like the others. It was plural. Um, so it seemed like a juvenile, all-powerful entity. Not like a Q, but I don't know.
It was very strange. So I like the way that they couldn't really communicate with it at first until they did a mind meld, and then it learned the humans' language so that it could communicate with them. But even then, communication was still a little. It wasn't fluent exactly, but that was just neat the way that they set up a way to be able to talk to it.
Yeah, they had to do some different strategies because it didn't understand language or thought.
But it was interesting that so it didn't know that any other beings existed. But it was all very alien, and I just thought that was really good. Like, oh, so we're the Enterprise had gone basically where no man has gone before, and now they've met this creature alien that was so alien that it didn't know anything or anybody else existed. So I just thought all of that was a cool concept, and great way to have something new in the book.
Yeah, it was definitely a very different kind of alien or entity. And then it was kind of interesting how uh, earlier on in the book when we talked about Harb Tanzer and that that he's the director of recreation, and he talks about creating some of these fantasies for the crew member, and Sulu's always in this holodeck or whatever you want, rec deck, playing piloting games. Harb Tanzer kind of one time Captain Kirk is in there, and Harb Tanzer gives him this kind of talk about the importance of play and is life a game, and that's kind of like a theme in the book, that life is a game. And so when they meet this alien and it learns for the first time that other beings exist, but then that the Enterprise crew is going to have to leave forever because they can't stay there because it's tearing a hole between the universes, then it becomes sad because now that it knows what it's like to not be alone, it doesn't want to be alone. And so in order to keep it not lonely, Katilk is able to create basically like a game that the alien is living in, where it can play different games. And it's kind of even like poker is part of it. I didn't totally
Yes.
understand all of it, to be honest, but that was interesting.
Yeah, I thought that was neat. The fact that Harp Tanzer could contribute that, like, oh, well, we should tell her to treat it like a game. like because that's what it's something that Harp Tanzer, specializes in, and something that he does actually could work for this alien. That was a neat idea. And also I like it how they at the end, Katilk wanted all the people to contribute something, like I forgot how she said it, but like give something of yourself. And I think it was all things that this alien could take with it as a part of humanity, right? It was so each person get like give your best gift, as Katilk said it.
Yeah. And also what that kind of reminded me of, there's a Next Generation episode called Future Imperfect, and it's where Riker thinks that he has, missed like 15 years of his life, and suddenly he's a widower, and he has a son whose name
Mm-hmm.
is John Luke, and it turns out it's an alien who has lived alone on this planet since he was a child, and that his parents left him there and made him able to create all these holograms and illusions to keep him entertained. And it kind of reminded me of that in a way, like the Enterprise crew in Katilk, they're doing all this stuff to keep this being entertained because they're going to be alone in the universe.
Yeah. Yeah, it is very similar to that. Yeah. So, any closing thoughts then?
Well, I think you can't go wrong with a Diane Duane novel. I've liked everything that she's read, and she really has a pretty amazing way of like world building and just how she develops everything. And she doesn't miss a beat. The only thing about this book, and I don't want to say that I wouldn't recommend it, but I did feel like in the beginning I was reading through it pretty fast. I found it all interesting, and then when you get to the point where they go outside of the galaxy or outside of the universe, and the crew is all in this joint hallucination, if you call it that, um, it seemed like it went on forever. Like they were
Mm-hmm.
walking, and it was like I felt like they're walking through the desert through for 40 years, like in the Bible. Like it just kept going on and on. They kept walking, and then they would pick up more people, and I was like, when is this gonna end? Like to me, like a lot of that could have been cut out. It just dragged for too much. That's how I felt. So I had to
Yeah.
kind of push to get through that. But aside from that, I mean, I think it's a really good story, especially if you're a fan of Diane Duane. But it's really interesting, so I would definitely recommend it.
Okay. Yeah, I enjoyed the book too. It was very interesting, and I like how the whole story was set up, and I like the fact that it was about exploration, and it didn't really have, well, it didn't have a main villain. I mean, it did have Klingons, but they were just a small part of the story. So it was mostly just about doing something, having these inversions and seeing and trying to go to the outside the galaxy, so that it was that kind of story. It wasn't anything. It wasn't war. It wasn't real protagonists or anything. So it was just about exploration. So and that was cool. Um, so one thing
Yeah,
about yeah.
I'm just gonna say I didn't even think of that, but you're totally right. That's one of the most of the books you read. There's whether it's the Klingons or the Romulans or something. There's some kind of enemy, even if the enemy is a person on the crew who's a traitor, or this one really didn't have that. I mean, the Klingons are mentioned, but it's more like um, just in passing, like we have to get this, make sure the Klingons don't you know get this technology, and they make like a very brief appearance, but they're not like the enemy of the book. They're pretty minor.
Right. One thing I will say is at the end when Catil like seems to know how to solve the problem. She said that she can give. What was I? Okay, she said she could write equations and give others universe. Yeah, that's right. The other universe needed to have time and entropy because it was just sort of stuck there with no end, no beginning, and no progression. I was wondering, like, so Katilka is that advanced that she could write equations to give a universe time and entropy, but with this, but in our universe, what she did, I mean, it was pretty amazing, but she still didn't know exactly that it would work or anything, and yeah, I mean,
Yeah. I mean, well, they kind of made her whole race to be out like they're all, the Hamaki are all these engineering geniuses, which makes you think if that's the case, why did it take them this long to come up with this if all you have to do is imagine it and it happens? But
Yeah.
then she doesn't really know what the outcome is. She didn't know it's going to like tear a fabric in the, in the universes, but then she can make a whole universe. And I'm like, well, if you're that powerful, like you don't really need a starship to go to another universe. You could just imagine yourself there, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, it was like I don't know, yeah, like, and that was just something that was thrown in at the end, and it's like, well, I guess maybe Diane Duane had to do a fast rewrite or something at the end.
She kind of was kind of interesting how she did it. She made it like her creation was like a symphony. It was kind of like music. They even said she sounded like she was singing, and they were talking about the harmonies and all this and that. So that was kind of interesting how she was like making math like music.
That was neat too. Yeah, the singing, yes. Overall, then I would say it is a good book. I would recommend it. Let's see, we'll give it, I would say 4.5 Quatloos.
Yeah, I'd give it 4 Quatloos.
Okay, pretty good. So, all right, that's the end of our review. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and I'm looking forward to coming back next time where we can continue to discuss Star Trek books. And I think next time we're going to be talking about John Warnholt's Contamination.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.